China has a singular opportunity to stabilize its economy by shifting away from excess production towards greater consumption. But the country needs to be a reliable partner in trade negotiations. If China will course correct by upholding its end of the initial trade agreement we outlined in Geneva, and I believe after our talks in London they will, then the rebalancing of the world's two largest economies is possible. By challenging the decades-old status quo on tax and trade, President Trump is breathing new life into the American economy. More than 500,000 private sector payroll jobs have been added since January. Most importantly, inflation in the U.S. is at its slowest pace since 2021, and the numbers we received today take us back to the slowest pace since 2020. Most importantly, we are decelerating cost increases for shelter, food, and energy. After 4 years of price increases diminishing the U.S. standard of living, inflation is showing substantial improvement due to the administration's policies. Furthermore, the labor market remains strong with low unemployment and plentiful labor demand as job openings remain high. This strength has been exemplified in the recent performance of the stock market and consumer confidence data. The President's bold leadership on these issues has laid the ground for a golden age economy. With your help, we can build on that foundation to create even more prosperity and abundance for the American people. We hope you will join us in this endeavor. Thank you all, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. We'll now proceed to the question and answer session. One of the more absurd attacks we hear from our Democrat colleagues is that the one big, beautiful bill is focused on the wealthy, not the working class. I'm sure the waitress who will keep more of her hard-earned money under the no tax on tips policy, or the lineman burning the midnight oil to restore power and seeing a tax cut under the no tax on overtime policy would be surprised to learn that Democrats consider them wealthy. Secretary Bessent, whether it is those policies or the tax relief in the bill for seniors, the double child tax credit and standard deduction, or the fact that the tax burden on the truly wealthy will actually rise under this bill, how does the one big, beautiful bill deliver primarily for working families?
Thank you for that question, Chairman Smith. As we saw in President Trump's first term, substantial non-inflationary growth was created. Non-inflationary growth. Real wages rose, and working Americans did better. Hourly workers did better than supervisory workers. We believe that this will happen again. As you outlined, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, the tax breaks for seniors on Social Security, and the ability to deduct auto loans on new cars made in America, as was available when I bought my first car in 1978, will be restored. All of this will help working Americans overcome this horrendous affordability crisis that this administration inherited.
The Biden administration negotiated a global tax scheme through the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development that would rob American taxpayers of $120 billion and would discriminate against American businesses. President Trump issued a day one executive order opposing the Biden administration's global tax surrender. In the one big beautiful bill, Congress provides the president, in line with that directive, specific targeted authorities to fight back in the event nations impose a discriminatory tax on American businesses, such as a UTPR. Last week, members of this committee met with an ambassador who was specifically concerned about how this provision would give the U.S. the ability to stand up for American businesses and respond to an unfair tax his country has imposed on American job creators. Secretary Bessent, why is it important for the Treasury Department and the President to have strong protective measures like the one provided in the One Big Beautiful Bill to fight against foreign taxes that discriminate against American companies? And how will the administration ensure that the use is targeted and in a manner to protect or replace U.S. tax revenue?
Mr. Chairman, for whatever reason, the previous administration chose to outsource American sovereignty on tax matters, and the Trump administration believes that is unacceptable. Unacceptable. Many other countries would seek to pull in revenues from U.S. multinational corporations into their treasuries. And rest assured that the provisions in the One Big Beautiful Bill to combat this are a staking out of our fiscal sovereignty. The U.S. tax system will stand next to what is called Pillar 2, and other countries are welcome to relinquish their fiscal and tax sovereignty to other nations. The United States will not. So this bill will allow us to prevent our corporate revenues from being drained into foreign treasuries, and that is in the hundreds of billions of dollars.
Thank you, Secretary. President Trump is also using tariffs to level the playing field and demand fair treatment for American workers, farmers, and manufacturers. Secretary, you are on the front lines of the President's economic policy agenda, including through your lead role in trade negotiations to demand fair treatment from China over the last couple days. How do the President's trade policies and tariffs and the total reset of our unfair trade and investment relationship with China that President Trump has led fit into the broader effort to reorient America's economy toward one that serves the working class instead of just the wealthy elites?
Mr. Chairman, China currently has the most imbalanced economy in the history of the world. They now have an approximate 30% share of global manufacturing, and they continually grow their manufacturing base. They are in the midst of a real estate downturn, some may cause a crisis, and they are trying to export their way out of it rather than take domestic measures such as increasing consumption, dealing with banking problems, or dealing with the real estate crisis. They cannot be allowed to export their way back to prosperity, which would mean substantial decreases in the standards of living, not only for the United States working Americans, but for working citizens across the world. Our negotiations with all countries seek to bring fairness, and I will echo President Trump's remarks. There are 18 important trading partners that we are in fulsome negotiations with. Many of them are coming to us with unimaginably good trade deals to bring down tariffs, non-tariff trade barriers, which the academic research has shown to can be even more pernicious than the tariffs, currency manipulation, and the subsidy of labor and industry. But as these countries come to us, and I look at the list, and I think, how could this have happened? How could this have happened? That the United States willingly became party to such unfair, and unbalanced trade. And as President Trump has said, I don't blame the other countries. If you could get away with it, you should. It was those sitting behind the Resolute desk or those making trade policy who've allowed this to happen over 40 years. And we are determined to rebalance that for the American people.
Thank you, Secretary. I now recognize the ranking member for any questions he might have.
Thank you, Chairman. So maybe we could stick to a couple of facts here, as previously discussed, and that is that if you made $1 million last year, you're going to get about $84,000 in tax relief with this bill. If you made under $50,000, you are likely to get about $1 a day. The President said that we'd have 90 trade agreements in 90 days. We're 89 short because of the manner in which some of these allies have been offended. We want trade balance for sure, but we also want to make sure that it's done in a manner that will last, not subject to the whims of the administration. I understand, Mr. Secretary, that you don't agree with some of the economic forecasts that have been projected as it relates to the big, beautiful bill. So Penn Wharton says this bill will add trillions of dollars to the national debt. The Yale Budget Lab says this will add trillions of dollars to the national debt. Well, we're 0 for 2. But how about Maya McGinnis? Not exactly known for their socialist leanings. They say this will add trillions of dollars to the national debt. Well, let's go to the Tax Foundation, hardly a left-leaning political organization. They say this will add trillions of dollars to the national debt because the money's going to be borrowed. Here, facts should matter. The advice of experts should matter. We have seen the bond market's reaction to some of these proposals. They're jittery. But you know what? In this committee, we listen. The administration is putting its head in the sand on this debt issue. The facts are going to be hard to escape. So let me turn to the impact of budget reconciliation as it relates to health care. In addition to adding trillions to the U.S. debt, the bill will cause 16 million Americans to lose part or all of their health insurance, according to CBO. We know what the consequence will be of losing health insurance for the American family. More visits to the emergency room, more postponed treatments, more bankruptcies that will come because of it. The problems that people have with health insurance only mean that later on the problems pile up. Bad health, the challenge that is now going to occur for our rural hospitals, surely many of which will be forced to close. Cutting more than $1.5 trillion from Medicaid, Medicare, and the Affordable Care Act certainly will mean job losses. No industry can sustain $1.5 trillion in cuts while we borrow money for a big tax cut that, despite what has been said here today, still favors people overwhelmingly at the top. Let me say, in regard to the testimony, Mr. Secretary, that you've offered, there's another key consideration here. You're suggesting that the improvements at the IRS have all taken place in the last 6 months? It's because of what we did with the Inflation Reduction Act. That's why the improvements have taken place, the technological upgrades that have taken place as well. We have a pretty good understanding of this. We want to use artificial intelligence for better tax collections. But all of this just happened in the last 6 months. That's our understanding based upon the testimony. The Commonwealth Fund, cuts to Medicaid and SNAP are going to lead to the loss of over 1 million jobs. The American Hospital Association estimates that tens of thousands of hospital jobs will be lost as a result of these cuts. Furthermore, a professor at Yale has said that this will conservatively cause tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths. Worse health care, job losses, more borrowed money. The American people deserve considerably better than what we're being told. But let me offer this challenge, Mr. Secretary. We would be prepared on the minority side to work with the administration and direct tax relief back to people under $400,000 of joint income, as opposed to the suggestion that is being offered here today. And if you disagree with the number that I offered about tax relief for somebody who made $1 million last year, let me give you the last 30 seconds to speak to that.
The Representative Neal, I have great respect for you. We've had good conversations, but respectfully, if I weigh 1,000 pounds and you weigh 50, and I gain 10 pounds, or I gain 10%, I have gained 100,000. That during President Trump's first tax cuts, the share of taxes paid by the high end of taxpayers, increased by more than 7%. And I'm sorry, I chuckled when you talked about the IT at the IRS. The program is 35 years behind schedule, 35 years. And is wasting $2 billion a year.
That's why we put the extra money in, Mr.
No.
Secretary.
The extra money went in for bodies, and whistleblowers acknowledged that standards were being lowered to bring in new agents. The money is not the issue here. It is how the money is spent.
That's exactly right. We agree on that, how the money is spent. And the last point that I would make,
it has been spent poorly.
let me make this last point, Mr. Secretary. Do you agree with the idea that in 2017, that the federal government, emanating from this committee, borrowed $2.3 trillion for that tax cut?
What the belief is that everyone on the Democratic side voted for the biggest blowout for the deficit in history, and that we are suffering from that. This past tax year, we will have between a 6.5 and 6.7% deficit, so I find it very difficult to be lectured to by people who created the largest deficit in history when we were not at war and not in a recession.
So I negotiated with Secretary Mnuchin the pandemic relief bill. If that's the reference point. That's where overwhelmingly the money went. That was not a bad infusion of money. It
That is
worked.
not
The Economist
overwhelming.
magazine and the Financial Times said in January, the American economy was the envy of the world. I yield back my time,
Well,
Mr. Chairman.
the spending was not the envy of the world.
I'm pleased to recognize the Vice Chairman of the committee, Mr. Buchanan.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here today. There's no doubt that your knowledge of finance and global markets bring a unique and welcome perspective to the Treasury, and this country is fortunate to have your leadership. Since coming to Congress, I've seen administrations from both parties, I'll say that up front, in terms of what's happened with the debt deficit. I want to get your perspective. I mean, the reality is, last 20 years, over $20 trillion in additional debt. I remember in the 80s, frankly, where we had the junk bond markets. If I look at all these younger people out here, what we're leaving them is deplorable. And I just want to make sure that we're giving as much consideration as we can to that. 49 out of 50 governors have to balance the budget. It's my biggest issue up here. It's not about one party or the other. It's both parties have done little or nothing in this area, and it needs to get addressed. When you spend last year, you take in $5 trillion, spend $7 trillion, and you average over $1 trillion a year for over the last 20 years. We need to get real about it, because again, in the 70s, in the 80s, all the junk bond, I seen what happened with all the markets and all that. So can you I know you touched on it, but we'll get into the pro-growth things in a minute. Can you just touch on it, your thoughts about where we're at and where we're going as it relates to that? I know we've got people looking at making cuts, but I do want to get your perspective on that.
Congressman, I've enjoyed our conversations in the past. You, as a very successful private businessman, understand the power of this tax bill, especially in the expensing. You and I discussed it in great detail. And look, we do not have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. We are right in line with the long-term revenues of approximately 17 to 18% of GDP. What we've seen here is a blowout in the spending. And as I was saying, last fiscal year was something we have never seen before. We have never seen a deficit to GDP this large when we were not at war, or not in a recession, or not in a pandemic.
Yeah,
But we
Mr.
could call that
Secretary,
a war.
we only have 5
And-
minutes. Let me just mention just real quickly. You mentioned, and I just want to get this in, that 100% expensing is like jet fuel. And 199 is huge. These are huge opportunities to make a big difference for small business. But to me, it's because I'm so passionate about it, because they're the job creators. So can you comment on that, your thoughts in terms of 199A and 100% expensing?
Congressman, I'll very quickly comment on two things. It is the 100% expensing that is powerful, and we are adding not only expensing for equipment, as in President Trump's first term, we are adding 100% for factory structures. So if you want to build your factory here in the U.S., we want it to be tax efficient. We want you to have regulatory certainty. We want you to have quick permitting, and that is likely the single most powerful aspect. As the ranking member discussed, on the 400,000 level, that unfortunately is a disaster for small business in the 199. Most small businesses are pass-through entities, and those small businesses are substantially above that 400,000 threshold.
Yeah, let me just add just a closing point. I do want to make on the whole thing of full expensing, it's probably the most powerful tool, whether you're buying or selling. Someone that's been in business for 40 years or so, I can tell you firsthand, it's a powerful tool. It's a job-creating tool. I did want to have you comment the other thing on making, I'd say in Florida, I was chairman of the Florida Chamber, one of the big issues there is about making the tax, whatever we do on taxes, making it permanent, so they got more certainty, they can do planning and investing in terms of going forward. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, sir. I was with a group of business leaders earlier this week, and they were telling me that they are, in fact, holding back on CapEx because they need for the tax bill to pass so that they will have certainty that the 100% expensing will come back. I think that we will see a sharp upward break in terms of CapEx as soon as we pass the One Big Beautiful Bill.
Thank you, and thanks for your leadership. We're excited you're here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Doggett.
Thank you. If beauty is in the eye of the beholder, certainly I can understand, Mr. Secretary, why you and the members of the Trump cabinet are so enthusiastic about this beautiful bill. It gives so much to those at the top, and of course Trump appointees are not just in the top 1%, but the top 1,000th of 1%. I applaud your personal success, but isn't it true that for you and for a number of cabinet members and other Trump appointees, simply not having your taxes restored to the level that existed when President Bush and President Obama were in office at 39.6% will provide you very substantial personal benefit? Yes or no?
That is not a yes or no question, sir.
All right, if you can't answer it.
As many people
Thank you, reclaiming my time. If you can't answer.
Have different tax
reclaiming my
arrangements.
time, please, sir.
And it is shown.
Mr. Chairman,
that
I don't want my time taken if the witness will not yield.
I would recommend, Mr. Doggett, that if you asked a question, at least allow them to answer.
You can recommend it, but you're taking my time from
your
him
time is
answering the
moving,
questions.
so
Continue.
use it.
Let me say, I understand you can't answer that with a yes or no. I'm concerned about the weaponization of the Internal Revenue Tax Code by the President and your role in it. Section 7217 of the Internal Revenue Code makes it unlawful for the President and his partners like you requesting IRS to conduct or terminate an audit or other investigation of a particular taxpayer. Section 6103, as you're familiar, protects taxpayer privacy. Yet in violation of both, the President began threatening Harvard in April, and on May 2nd, he declared, we're going to be taking away Harvard's tax-exempt status. It's what they deserve. And you've been part of the we when you said on May 23rd that you publicly declared that you were moving forward on this, that there were a substantial number of rules that Harvard may have violated. Can you tell me, yes or no, whether you can pledge to avoid any interference in IRS audits or investigations of particular taxpayers? And if you can't answer that yes or no, just say so, and then I'll move on to the next question.
Sir, that is without question that I will follow the law.
All right, sir. Can you tell us whether, yes or no, you can report back to this committee in 30 days after investigating, to assure us that there have not been any request by the president, any political appointee, or any family member of the president to direct or influence the audit or termination of an audit or investigation of any taxpayer or entity?
Well, Congressman, as you said, this is all private matters, so it would be out of line for me to report back on any
All
of
I
this.
ask-
But I can assure you that I will follow the law and all proper procedures.
Thank you. I'm just asking you whether you can report back in 30 days whether there has been any attempt, I'm not asking for the specifics of who was involved, by the president or any of the other people I mentioned, to influence or direct any audit or investigation of a taxpayer. Can you do that, sir?
Well,
Just answer.
I can report right here. I am not in the habit of repeating private conversations, but the president and I have never had a conversation on Harvard's tax status.
So
I will report that right here. We don't need 30 days.
I'm not asking just about Harvard.
We
If
don't
they can
need
pick
30
on
days.
Harvard, they can pick on anyone, and I'm just asking for a simple report on whether there have been any efforts of that, whether from the president or one of his associates, and it would seem to me that would be easy to do. But let me move also to the question of privacy as it relates to data sharing. Do you agree that there is no authorization for the IRS to share tax data broadly with DOJ or federal agencies for the general purpose of data consolidation?
Section 6103 protects
Precisely.
taxpayers' information. We have followed all proper procedures, and including in terms of the data sharing with the Department of Homeland Security, we are allowed to share taxpayers' information for those taxpayers who are believed to be criminals or have committed a crime.
I'm asking you about DOJ and its apparent effort to have an omnibus information sharing agreement with agencies. Do you agree that you cannot share taxpayer data without statutory authorization from this Congress, and you don't have any for that purpose?
We will follow the direction of the regulations and the court, sir.
Are you sharing any taxpayer information with DOJ for this omnibus information sharing agreement where they seem to probe into the privacy of every American, consolidating with Social Security and other private information? Or is there such sharing going on now, sir?
Well, first of all, I would push back on that characterization.
You can do so.
And
I just want to know if you're sharing in the
I
time
will
that
tell you,
remains.
and there seems to be a misunderstanding among many people on your side of the aisle on what DOJ is. DOJ employees,
I understand you had some misunderstanding about it, and Mr. Musk yourself, but let me ask you again, just simply on the question I'm asking, are you sharing any of this data with DOJ without congressional authorization?
as I said, we are following all of the laws.
Thank you. I would appreciate an answer to my question, but I will yield back since my time has expired.
Mr. Smith is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for sharing your time here today. And I've not been around here as long as Mr. Neal has, but I do want to bring in a bit of a historical perspective that I think is relevant. Looking back, you know, we can argue about CBO and JCT, and it's an imperfect system. And I think that's manifested itself in various hits and misses on projections, whether it goes all the way back to the original parts of the cost of Medicare that was way underestimated, or whether it was the structure of a more market-based approach with Medicare Modernization Act that precedes my time here, but actually cost a lot less than was projected. You go to the receipts, post-2017 tax action, the receipts exceeded what was projected. So we have an imperfect system, but it's what we have. And I think we need to go on that. Now, you take things a step further, and I remember the president's economic advisor, Mr. Hassett, pointing out that with COVID, yes, there was bipartisan action. I'll say that a few of those components still give me heartburn, as much as an emergency that we found ourselves in. But when, at the beginning of COVID, when unemployment spiked and the GDP dipped, Congress acted. By the end of 2020, GDP was back to about even. New President Biden was advised not to spend what he insisted on spending. I would I would suggest they're probably grappling with going back to the Obama stimulus, and they think that the only mistake of the Obama stimulus, so-called, was it didn't spend enough money, rather than address the bureaucratic approach that, like the joke was shovel-ready, maybe wasn't what it was described to be. But we have these imperfect projection systems, and yet we've got the reality of experience. And I think this is important to note, and especially on the IRS structure and the desire to spend money on more people at the IRS, because that could generate more audits and that would generate more revenue, and then we can spend that revenue that, good grief, still wasn't enough to cover what the actual IRA costs came in and came to be. So we have to deal with these realities, and it's because they're imperfect systems that we just have to acknowledge. And that's why, Mr. Secretary, I had not heard the numbers on the IRS, and especially in these efforts most recently, that we were told that if we pushed back on the number of new IRS agents and auditors, we were going to undermine the revenues, and yet a different approach that focused more on technology, because there was a willingness to focus more on technology here on this side of the dais than there was with just hiring more people that actually, even in the best of scenarios, did not come to be. Thank goodness, I might add. But we are in a situation now where in 2017, we did what was right, and I'm glad that there was bipartisan support to extend a lot of what we did in 2017 that did not have bipartisan support then. Now, that didn't pass the Senate. We are where we are, and now heading into a situation where what we have at hand with this reconciliation bill is good for workers. It's good for workers, it's good for economic expansion and encouraging investment and increasing productivity so that we can grow the economy without triggering inflation. President Biden was warned not to push more spending by Democrats, I might add. I think of Mr. Summers primarily, advising against that. Did it anyway. We are still paying the price. We're trying to dig out from a lot of that. And that's why we're doing the bill that we are. Gosh, I have other things that I'd love to ask questions on. But I think it's important to realize that we need to deal with reality here. That's what we are doing. And Mr. Secretary, thank you. I look forward to further conversations, whether it's trade, whether it's IRS, whether it's various things that we need to do to get our country to a better place, realizing that the solutions are really in the private sector and triggering everything we can on our side to encourage the private sector to provide more opportunity. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. You know, the economic outlook of the United States has soured a bit since President Trump assumed office. We've gone from record lows in unemployment, historic growth, and lowering inflation to unprecedented trade wars, volatile markets, and low consumer sentiment. And for the record, Mr. Chairman, I would like to enter surveys from consumers from the University of Michigan, a trade war impacting the shipping economy, and the OECD article on the downward turn in economic turn in the U.S.
Without objection.
Thank you. This is only made worse by the Republicans' big, ugly bill and the administration's proposed budget. I have a few items I want to raise with you, Mr. Secretary, but given our limited time, I want to focus on the projected impact of the reconciliation legislation. Economists from the CBO, the JCT, the University of Pennsylvania, Yale University, the Committee for Responsible Budget, and the Bipartisan Policy Center have all projected that this legislation will add trillions of dollars to our national debt. Experts have also projected that close to 16 million Americans will lose access to their health care, and 11 million Americans will lose access to nutrition benefits. These figures aren't coming from Democratic talking points. They're coming from economic experts with years of expertise. Yet, Mr. Secretary, you have time and again gone public and said that you dispute these claims. I believe you're a very intelligent and very competent individual. You're a Yale graduate, an adjunct professor, served as the managing partner of the George Soros Fund Management Office in London, and led Key Square Capital Management, a global hedge fund, and you're a billionaire. So the question I have is, why is it that you seem intent on disavowing any and all expert opinions that are inconvenient to your political agenda? Unfortunately, it strikes me that you are hell-bent on ignoring the warnings of any independent expert whose opinions may not serve your goals. When you worked in finance and your analyst told you that a proposal was a bad idea, I suspect that you listened to your analysis and didn't just accept the deal because the person proposing it said they were wrong and that their deal was a good deal. That would be wrong, it would be irresponsible, and it would be dangerous. I would submit that in the position that you have now, it is even worse. It's more wrong, it's more irresponsible, and it's more dangerous. Mr. Secretary, can you point to one independent study, one study performed by an expert PhD economist who is not on the payroll of this administration that says that this legislation will not add to our national debt?
Well, Congressman,
Yes or no? Can you point to one?
if we want to look at the CBO, which
No, I'm not asking you, is there an independent expert that you can point to that says that this bill will not add to our national debt? Yes or no?
yes,
There is?
yes,
What are they?
Art Laffer,
Pardon me?
Art Laffer.
Art Laffer? Great. That, I don't think that one counts. Mr. Secretary, did the 2001 Bush tax cuts add to our debt?
Sorry?
Did the
I-
2001 Bush tax cuts add to our debt? Yes or no?
Again, Congressman.
Yes or no?
I think it's important to look at framing here.
Okay,
One
I'm
thing
reclaiming
that-
my time. It's
one
clear that
thing
you're not going to answer the questions that are asked. And let me make it real simple for you. The Bush tax cuts added to the debt. The second round of Bush tax cuts added to our national debt. The last Trump tax cuts added to our national debt. And every expert will tell you that the proposed Trump tax cuts will also add to our national debt. That is the honest answer, and I would have expected you could have just given us a yes or no on whether or not these preposterous tax cuts that will benefit clearly the most wealthy people, the people who don't need a tax cut in this environment, will add to our national debt. This is bad public policy, it's bad for the American taxpayers, it's bad for our economy, and it's atrocious for our future in regard to the national debt, and I yield back.
Next, we have the chairman of our tax committee, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding the meeting. Mr. Secretary, thanks for being here today. We get into these back and forth, and it comes down to who struck John. I think both sides of the aisle can talk about things and policies in the past that caused wherever we are today to be wherever we are today. The question isn't about the history of how we got here. The question is, how do we remedy it? How do we fix it going forward? I'm from the private sector. And I really do believe before anybody should ever serve in public office, they should have been in the private sector and worked where they got paid on commission only and had lost their job at least once and had faced an unbelievable task of trying to keep your business open when there was no revenue coming in. So I don't want to grill you and all these things of asking you a question and not allowing you to answer it, because that seems to become the thing. I'd rather go back to consistency and certainty. The hardest thing for anybody in the private sector is trying to figure out what the next administration is going to do, or what's going to happen at midterms, and whether I'm going to make an investment or not going to make an investment, because that can change overnight. I get that, and I'm sitting here now and I'm trying to figure out, no wonder hardworking American taxpayers have lost faith in the way we operate. But I just want to ask you this, because I think it's really critical. So I have kind of a little bit of a football background. I look at this, we're in the fourth quarter now. with a 2-minute warning and no timeouts left. I want you to share with us what could happen, and forget the Potomac amnesia about who's responsible for it. Let's go to what actually is going to happen if this bill doesn't get passed. How is it going to affect hardworking American taxpayers?
Congressman, good to see you again.
Good to see
It
you,
is
sir.
what we call in economics a sudden stop. It would be cataclysmic. It would be the largest tax hike in history. It would be a disaster for businesses, for working Americans, and for our status in the world. That to have this happen, we would see increases in taxes on thousands of dollars of working Americans. We would see business contract, and we would see a substantial increase in the unemployment rate.
So as you look at what's taking place right now, and I think there's always the back and forth about do these tariffs work, do they not work? Just from a standpoint, your background is incredible for you to be in this position today. So I want to thank you for doing that, because you stepped out of a pretty comfortable life where people weren't firing questions at you, not allowing you to answer them. Just going forward, and you told people just now what's going to happen if we don't get this passed. So what is it that, in addition to what we could do, that we're not already doing?
Congressman, it is certainty and permanence. As we have seen, the corporate tax rate is permanent. We are not arguing on that here. Businesses have great certainty. Households do not. Small businesses do not. And this administration, myself especially, given my small town roots, they are laser focused that Main Street can do well here. And Main Street is a series of small business owners who work every week to make payroll. On average, 9 employees, family owned, and this would be cataclysmic for them. On the other side, having permanence, being able to invest, being able to hire more workers, being able to expand, will lead a Main Street resurgence. We will also see a manufacturing resurgence. Approximately 9% of Americans are now engaged in the manufacturing sector. History has shown us that wage growth occurs more readily in the manufacturing sector for working class Americans than in the service sector. So the combination of small business and manufacturing, along with the president's tax agenda for no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, a tax cut for seniors, and the ability to buy a new American-made car and deduct the interest, they will solve this horrendous affordability crisis. Because the way to think about it, Congressman, we are dealing with two things here. We are dealing with affordability, and we are dealing with inflation. Affordability is the stock of inflation, and we are working to pull that down. That can be pulled down two ways: through price levels or increase real wages. I think we can do both, but the real fill-up here would be increase real wages for working Americans. On the other side, we just saw yet another fantastic inflation number, much of that due to decrease in energy prices.
Thank you for being here, and again, for you to step out of your private life was very comfortable. To step into this arena, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Thank you so much for being with us today and your service. We appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for coming before the committee as well. It's pretty clear, and listen, who needs to get into arguments when you need answers? But you can see the frustration on this side. I appreciate your loyalty to the president and understanding your responsibility, but it seems pretty clear that in the time that we're given to ask a question, et cetera, the reason that people are seeking yes and no answers is because of the time that's allotted. It has nothing to do with you personally or whatever. You're obviously very bright and intelligent. So, Mr. Secretary, would you agree that I give great credit to Representative Massey, who stood on the floor and addressed the Congress during the debate on this bill, and he never criticized the president. He never criticized a fellow Republican. What he did was address the facts, and he laid them out very clearly. Let me quote what he had to say here. This bill is a debt bomb ticking. Congress can do funny math, fantasy math if it wants, but bond investors don't. This week, they sent us a message. Moody's downgraded our credit rating, and the bond investors who buy and finance our debt demanded higher interest rates on a 10-year note, 20-year note, and 30-year note. What does this mean? Very soon, the government will be paying $16,000 in interest for paying $16,000 of interest alone per U.S. family. What are we telling them? Instead of taking care of that problem, we are going to give them a tax break. The frustration you hear up here, of course, is that there's denial that tax breaks don't add to the national debt. Was Moody's wrong? Was Representative Massey's assessment wrong?
I can tell you that clearly Representative Massey doesn't understand the bond market, and that any 24-hour window, as he's just said, is incorrect. That I will point out that the U.S. 10-year, which I repeatedly reference, is the only major 10-year bond that has a lower yield this year.
So,
Has a lower yield today than it did on January 1st or January 20th. German yields are higher, Japanese yields are substantially higher, but U.S. 10-year yields are lower. So I'm not sure what's on Representative Massey's mind.
so Massey is wrong. And Moody's was wrong too?
Moody's, even the Democrats say that
What do you mean, even the Democrats?
the last time that the U.S.
I don't know. What do you have to do with Moody's? You know,
In 2011, when the U.S. was downgraded, Larry Summers, then NEC head, called Moody's a lagging
So-
indicator.
is Moody's wrong or right? Yes or no?
Moody's is a lagging indicator,
Okay,
and
so
anyone who
you can
invested
understand the frustration, and I appreciate
using
your
Moody's-
intelligence and ability to talk over. But when we're addressing the American people and we're in a hearing like this, someone as bright and as capable as you are could explain to the American people and still remain loyal to the president, loyal to our colleagues on this dais who supported the bill. There is a strong difference of opinion. And that's what is being expressed here, opinion. There's no focus or dedication on the actual facts. We'll find that out, and people on this aisle are saying, well, don't worry, there's going to be no impact on kids not getting food, 16 million people being kicked off of their health insurance. That's some mirage. That's some fictitious notion that Democrats have made up. And this national debt stuff, well, whether it's Moody's, whoever it is who has come out, whether it's the Wharton School, they're all wrong or misguided or uninformed, as Secretary Massey was. I yield back.
Mr. Schweikert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, how's the jet lag?
Been better.
Yeah, it's
better.
look, it's impressive, but I don't know if you get frequent flyer miles for all this traveling.
No, but I take my responsibilities of reporting to Congress very seriously.
No, we appreciate you making the effort to get here. I'm going to give you something that's a little bit different, but it's more some of the things we specialize with the Joint Economic Committee and those. We'd like to actually engage this is probably more technical staff, on what we can do to actually, there's things we can do policy-wise, message-wise, product-wise, in regards to moving away from notes and bills and being able to create some additional interest liquidity on the bonds, moving out in the curve. With past Treasury secretaries, we've done presentations on everything from Professor Schiller's Trill's idea, where it's a bond, but it actually has a slight attachment to, as an equity interest in the U.S. tax receipts, so therefore it's sympathetic with tax revenues, to things you've actually written about, or your team around you have written about, certain gold indexes and other things for long-term debt. My interest is very much, and this is a intellectual conflict many of us in Congress have, the substantial portion of growth of debt is demographics. We don't like to tell people the truth, but we have a dramatic shortage of young people in the country. Today, compared to 20 years ago, we have double the number of people 65, but our 18-year-olds are exactly the same as 20 years ago. It's demographics. And we're going to try to make demographics partisan, because that's what we do. How does someone like me work with your team to actually give you product ideas, messaging to the markets and liquidity that going along on the curve is stable, and we're going to be there to protect our full faith and credit?
Congressman, you raise a very important issue, and what you're talking about is something called the dependency ratio. The U.S. is the only major industrialized economy where that ratio is roughly stable. It is in slight decline. Many other economies, Italy, Japan in particular, they are seeing the dependency ratio blow out, and hence their productive capability. We would welcome the opportunity to engage with you and your staff on any ideas that you may have. Right now, we are committed to the regular cadence of Treasury issuance as it is. I would add that in my lifetime, and I can't believe, to go back to experts, we always see, it's this industrial revolution, it's that industrial revolution. I'm not sure whether we're on the fourth or fifth, but I do believe that we are on an industrial revolution, an AI revolution that may lead to a productivity breakthrough that could be very important.
Mr. Secretary, you're stealing one of my speeches, but synthetic biology, AI, automation, and that's actually, it's a side conversation on reindustrialization and the actual statistical information of how much of that's going to be labor substitute by automation, and therefore we may not get the same wage growth in the academic literature, but that's going to geeking out a little bit. My great interest is, I don't believe many of us on this committee have spent enough time, whether it be a Democrat in the White House, a Republican, on debt management, and the fact we on this committee have the responsibility to work with you in Treasury to have as much stability in that model. Because today we borrow, about $72,000 a second? Outside the math for extraordinary measures.
I haven't done it by second, but I think
yeah,
on a daily basis. But Congressman, I can tell you, the thing that would give us the greatest debt stability is the increasing the debt ceiling.
No,
because
I don't disagree
that is a cataclysmic outcome that we will never allow to happen.
Mr. Secretary, absolutely agree. Visibility, capacity is important. But even your own numbers, in 9 years, we borrow about $100,000 a second, almost solely driven by demographics, healthcare, Medicare, and interest. I beg of you, it's hard to do in front of these microphones because it's uncomfortable to talk about, but it's math, and it's the reality of what we are as people. We need to work together to provide visibility to these debt markets. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Davis from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary. Today, Secretary Bessent appears here to praise the Republican One Big Beautiful Bill. That is the most cruel, draconian, inhumane legislation that I've voted on since I've been here. Government, I seriously believe, should help people and not hurt them. I reject this bill that makes poor people poorer, sick people sicker, and hungry people hungrier. I reject this bill that rips health care from 16 million Americans, with over 498,000 Illinoisans expected to lose their health insurance, including 102,000 children and 27,000 seniors in my district alone. I reject this bill that threatens my constituent Deborah and her 2 children, whom she adopted from foster care. The picture behind me shows Deborah's children, who are medically fragile and rely solely on Medicaid for their health care. I reject this bill that will close hospitals in my district and kick people out of their nursing homes, not only in my district, but across the country, especially in urban inner city communities and rural communities for sure. I reject this bill that explodes poverty and suffering while giving wealthy trillions in tax cuts. And I reject this bill's irresponsible explosion of the deficit that triggers statutory cuts to critical programs supporting children and families. These pay-go reductions would eliminate funding for the maternal, infant, and early childhood home visiting program, known as MACV, that have proven to improve mother and child health, family safety, and child development. It would eliminate the guaranteed funding for the Mary Lee Allen Promoting Safe and Stable Families program that we know helps prevent child maltreatment and strengthen families. It would eradicate the social services block grant that provides substantial investment in child care, child welfare, and adult protective services. These egregious cuts alone will cost Illinoisans over $72 million and hurt Illinois children, seniors, and families. I reject this bill that gives tax cuts to the wealthy, paid for by denying and depriving low-income, poor people, senior citizens, sick people, unhealthy people, the health care, food assistance, housing assistance, and economic development opportunities that they need. This bill reminds me that there is something rotten in Denmark. There is something wrong with the thinking that puts such a bill in front of us. This bill is actually what we call the Robin Hood in reverse. Take from the poor, take from the disabled, take from the sick, take from the hungry, and give to the wealthy. It is not good, it is immoral. I reject it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. LaHood is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. Thanks for your service to our country. I would argue, Mr. Secretary, that President Trump got elected last November on 2 issues, fixing the unmitigated disaster at our southern border and fixing the economy. And obviously, you play a big role in fixing the economy and working with us on that. Go back a year ago, we had high inflation, high interest rates, unaffordable energy costs, supply chain frustrations. And that factored into people going to the polls and wanting a change on the economy. And as we think about the bill that we've put together, the One Big Beautiful Bill, there's lots of things in this bill that help this economy. But fundamental to that is making permanent things like 199A, bonus depreciation, research and development tax credit, the affordable housing tax credit, unleashing American energy, all included in this bill. And I think we predicate this bill on how do we have predictability and certainty long-term in this economy. And those investments that are made by small, medium, and large companies, whether you're a plumber in Peoria, Illinois, or you're a Fortune 100 company, you want predictability and certainty. And as been alluded to earlier, if we do nothing and this bill doesn't pass, you're going to have $4.5 trillion of tax increases. And if you think there's uncertainty in the economy now, wait until that happens. And so the other, I think, observation that's been made is there's a lot of money and resources sitting on the sidelines waiting to be invested. But we need that predictability and certainty. And I would argue we do that in this bill. I wanted to ask you if you can comment on what this bill will do to the economy and on predictability and certainty.
Good, Congressman, thank you for that. And I would also like to talk about what this bill will not do to the economy. Because what we saw in the tax bill under the Biden administration, which I believe was immoral, was rampant inflation. Rampant inflation, which is the best way to steal from working Americans. And the basket of goods and services that working Americans require had a substantially higher inflation rate than the 21% reported by the Bureau of Statistics. So in excess of 30% of purchasing power was stolen from working families. We had, in the summer of 2024, we had a record amount of food bank usage in the United States of America at the same time that the previous administration's tax bill, we had a record number of trips to Europe. And that is not an America we want. Record trips to Europe, record food bank usage. So anyone who voted for that tax bill, that was the outcome. What we are doing is trying to get back, as you said, to President Trump's private sector job growth creation. And the tax bill will incentivize private sector growth. Equally important, this administration's economic plan is a three-legged stool. It is trade, it is taxes, and it is deregulation. And what we saw under the Biden administration that created the great inflation was we saw the impetus in spending as the government flooded the zone, but we saw substantial regulatory increase, so a demand shock was met with supply constraints. What we are doing with the help of this committee and congressmen like you, we are creating a private sector demand shock that is going to be met with a deregulatory release. So we will go back to 2018 and 2019, we will have strong growth and it will be non-inflationary.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Sanchez is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. There was no tax bill passed during the Biden administration, and I know that because I served on this committee during that administration. So I just wanted to clarify that. And in the interest of time, because our time here is limited, I'm going to ask you to please limit your answers to yes or no questions, and I'm going to jump straight into those questions. Mr. Secretary, do you still believe that the president's tariffs are going to be a one-time price adjustment for American families?
If prices go up, they will be one time.
Okay, well, unfortunately, you appear to be talking out of both sides of your mouth because you yourself have admitted after conversations with Walmart that some tariff costs are going to get passed on to consumers. And in fact, we've already seen that prices are rising on many everyday goods.
No,
And they-
Congresswoman,
Please
today
don't interrupt me.
we had
The
a
time is mine.
1.1
The
increase.
time is mine. Please don't interrupt
And-
me.
and
I
Wal-
will ask you
Wal-
questions and I will grant you an opportunity to answer them, but please don't interrupt me during my time.
With pleasure.
Okay, I know I'm a woman, but please try to limit yourself to answering my questions. No, I'm sorry, but we get talked over by 38% and baby-born dolls by 43%. Household goods like drills, toolkits, vacuums have also gone up. Stanley Black & Decker recently announced higher prices for all of their products, and these are just some of the products that are affected. On average, Trump's tariffs are estimated to cost households $3,000 more for the same goods than they would have last year. And that's money that could
I'm
be
sorry,
going to...
that's incorrect, and
That is
I'm not
not
sure who's
incorrect. The
estimated.
best estimates are
And the best
that
estimate is-
consumers will pay $3,000 more for the same goods
And that estimate is from
that they
whom?
did last year.
That estimate's from whom,
I will get
Congresswoman?
you the estimates.
Right, because
But
the
that's
C-
money
the
that,
C-
but
the
that's money that
CBO
could be going
estimates
to
a
paying
0.4%
goods,
increase.
or paying rent and groceries. And it's clear that Trump's trade wars are hurting American families, yet all we have to show for the economic pain are news reports of these flimsy trade deals. And I understand, Mr. Secretary, that you are co-leading the China trade negotiations. Do you think that China is a reliable trading partner?
I think we will see.
Well, pardon me for being skeptical of this administration's ability to get anything meaningful out of trade negotiations with China, because this administration is too swamped with trying to negotiate with 90 countries around the world. And to me, a poorly negotiated trade deal with China is probably not worth the paper that it's written on, because this is China's China's track record. These are facts. In the Trump administration's Phase 1 trade deal, China promised to increase purchases of U.S. goods and services by $200 billion over 2 years. Countless reports, and you yourself, have noted that China has failed to meet these purchase commitments. Those were purchase commitments that were negotiated by Trump in his first administration.
They met their agreements under President Trump in 2020, and President Biden did not enforce them, and the Chinese delegation told me that they did not believe they needed to
No,
adhere
I'm
to them
reclaiming my
under-
time. That's
so-
incorrect. China has also not made the structural reforms that they promised Trump that they would. Many U.S. companies still reported widespread intellectual property theft and counterfeiting. So excuse me if the last attempt by the Trump administration to secure meaningful change from China doesn't exactly inspire any confidence in the current negotiations. And, you know, quite frankly, negotiating trade agreements with China requires more time and effort than this administration has given so far. And that's why I was alarmed to hear this morning that Trump said that the U.S.-China deal was done after just 2 days of talks in London. Mr. Secretary, the press release on this so-called deal looks more like a framework. Congress, who has the constitutional authority over trade, needs the details of this supposed deal. So I'm asking if you will provide this committee with the actual details of this deal, because there has been, unlike what was said earlier, there has been no consultation with our side of the aisle, at least, on the China negotiation. Will you commit to giving us the specifics of that deal, the details?
Congresswoman, I flew back at 4 a.m. this morning to be here this morning, and we are...
It's a simple yes or no question.
No, it is not a simple yes or no question. We are in the midst of constructing it, and back to your question, China has proven an unreliable partner in strategic...
Will you commit to consulting with us on trade deal with China?
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
I would ask the witness be allowed
Gentlewoman's-
to answer that last
Gentlewoman's
question.
time has expired. I
It's
now
a yes or no
recognize-
question. It's very simple.
Representative, I raised many of your concerns to the Chinese delegation, and it will be a longer process. The trade deal today, or last night, was for a specific goal, and it will be a much longer process. And I will note that the previous administration did nothing.
But excuse me, the
Mr.
question
Arrington
was
is
whether
now
or not you
recognized.
would
The
consult
gentlewoman's
with
time has
members of
expired.
Congress.
Mr. Arrington's time
It's my time
is now
now.
Mr. Arrington's time, 5 minutes.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for your service. I think my best contribution now in 5 minutes is to separate fact from fiction and help debunk some of these tired old baseless and false claims from my Democrat colleagues. Let's start with Ms. Sanchez and her claim that they didn't pass the tax bill. That's not wrong. That is completely false. The Inflation Reduction Act was a tax and spending bill. They levied taxes on corporations. They increased taxes on stock buybacks. It was a tax and spend bill. We marked it up in the tax committee. What you won't find, though, Mr. Secretary, is a tax increase on the billionaires. You won't find a tax increase in their tax bill on millionaires. They didn't raise the tax rate for the top 10%, the top 20%, the top 30%. They didn't raise taxes on their millionaire. They didn't create the wealth tax that they're going to criticize us for. In fact, we're preventing all marginal rates from increasing by extending the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and including the top rate from going to 39% from 37%. They didn't increase it from 37% to 39%. They had total Democrat control, and they didn't do it. Feign indignation is what that is. Now, let's go through some more facts. If we don't pass the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act because they're successful in stopping it, there'll be a 22% on average tax increase for all Americans. Is that true or false?
True.
They'll lose about $5,000, $6,000, the median household income, they'll lose about $5,000, $6,000 of their family budget. True or false?
At least that amount.
Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, did the top 10%, did the top 1% pay a greater share of taxes after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act?
A much higher percentage, sir.
Did the top 1% that paid 38% of the entire cost of the federal government actually, after TCJA, pay a higher percentage of the cost of the federal government, going from 38% to 45%? True or false?
Yes, sir, 7% more.
And the top 10% was paying 70%. Top 10% earners in this country pay 70% of the freight of the federal government. After the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, they are now paying 75%. Is that true or false?
It is correct.
So another false claim during the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passage was that this was a tax cut for the rich and for corporations. Is it true or false that the Washington Post gave the Democrats 4 Pinocchios, saying 3 out of $4 in the tax cuts benefited individuals, not corporations?
I don't read the Washington Post.
Well, they gave 4 Pinocchios. Even the Washington Post could not tolerate that misleading and false claim. The bottom 10% wages grew twice as fast as the top 10. True or false after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act?
Yes, sir, and household net worth increased substantially faster for the bottom 50%.
True or false? Did the poverty rate sink to an all-time record low after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act?
Yes, sir.
Did we have the lowest unemployment rate among minorities and women after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act?
Yes, sir.
How can these things be true and what they're saying true, Mr. Secretary?
I will leave that to
the American people.
the American
because
people.
This is empirical data.
Who had a referendum on November 5th.
They sure did. And this is empirical data. These are verifiable facts. Now, let's move to this notion, I got a minute left, that somehow we've increased the national debt in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Forget for a minute that they, under their control, full Democrat control, added $8 trillion, and under President Biden, $8 trillion to the national debt. 40-year inflation, soaring interest, all because of their failed economic policies, paying people not to work, expanding welfare without work requirements, taxes, barrage of regulation, record regulatory cost on small businesses, and the list goes on, okay? And we've all suffered, especially working people. As you said, it was a regressive tax, that 20+% increase in the cost of essential goods and services. But if you take CBO's static scores, the cost of the bill is about $4.16 trillion. If you take the $1.7 trillion in savings, the largest spending reduction in the history of the United States by twofold, and you put a conservative growth rate, because CBO's growth rate is 1.8 in their baseline. That 1.8 is based on the last 4 years of failed economic policies and unbridled spending. It's not based on the policies embedded in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. President Trump grew the GDP by 1 percentage point from 1.8 to 2.8. Even Joe Biden had an annual average of 2.7. We put 2.6 in there as an assumption, which yields $2.6 trillion.
Gentleman's
The
time
net effect is we reduced the deficit
The gentleman's
and then
time
some.
has expired.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate you being here. God bless America and go West Texas.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Sewell for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Treasurer, Secretary of the Treasury. I actually, with all due respect, only get 5 minutes, so I'm going to ask, my constituents have sent me a list of questions that they just want yes or no answers to, and out of respect for the time and the fact that they want some clarity, I hope that you'll just say yes or no. The first question is, will the big, beautiful bill add to the national debt? Yes or no? Is that a yes or a no? That's a no? Yes?
Sorry?
What did you say? I'm sorry.
It remains to be seen.
Well, I mean, look, the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office official score of this bill says that it increases the federal deficit by $2.4 trillion.
Sorry to interrupt, Congresswoman, but the CBO also said the tariff income over the 10-year window would be $2.8 trillion.
You know,
so that would be
you want to talk about
$400 billion.
dynamic scoring and all that
There's
stuff.
nothing
And my-
dynamic about that.
but-
You're
but
quoting the
my-
CBO, I'm quoting the CBO, so let's level
Listen,
set.
we can level set, but the reality is that I have constituents back home who are really scared. They're scared that prices have gone up. This administration has promised that prices will go down. That's absolutely has not occurred for them. And every time they hear the word tariff, they think of the fact that it's another tax on them that will be passed on to them for goods and services. At any rate, not only did the CBOs say that that this bill will increase the deficit by $2.4 trillion. The Committee for Responsible Federal Budget said at $2.5 trillion. The Yale Budget Lab, $2.4 trillion. The point I'm trying to make is that you will add to the national debt over the span of this time. The second question that they wanted me to ask is, will all Americans have a net benefit from this beautiful big bill?
It is it's difficult to.
Yes or no?
Again, it's impossible to say all Americans. It is ridiculous for me to give an answer for 337 million.
Well, I can
people.
tell you what a lot
I
of my
can say the balance of probability is that Americans will get a substantial increase, especially if you're referring to working people in your district.
Yep.
They should do very well, as they did
Can I
in
tell you what the
2018
distribution
and
tables tell us?
2019.
You know, the distribution the numbers don't lie. The average tax cut in 2027 for people in this bill making $1 million is about $81,500. So someone who makes $1 million, and no one in my district makes $1 million, to my knowledge, will get a tax increase, will get a tax benefit of $81,000. That's $223 a day. Now, the average tax rate in 2027 for people making under $50,000, which in my district is about 63% of the people that I represent, they will only get a tax break or tax increase of $265, which is 73 cents per day. That's pittance. When you think about the fact that the IRS, which this administration has decimated, closing field offices everywhere, laying off or dismissing thousands of workers from the IRS. The folks in my district often get bombarded with inquiries about their earned income tax credits, and billionaires that are going to get $81,500 more don't. So, I mean, the point that I'm trying to make is that not all Americans will benefit the same. We know that because people make different things. But the fact of the matter is, if you're only saving me $268 and you're taking away my health care, which 16 million Americans will have no health care, will lose their health care, and they have to lose their health care in order for you guys to actually pay for your bill. I mean, to pay for your bill by kicking people off health insurance and giving them no health care, to me is immoral and not fair. The last question that I was asked to ask you was, when will we hit the debt ceiling? I know that this big, beautiful bill also means a increase in the debt ceiling, and frankly, I heard you say that that is something that's an imperative. I would agree with that. When do we foresee us hitting the debt ceiling?
Congresswoman, I want to congratulate you. You have a very sophisticated constituency to ask questions like this. That the so-called X date is a...
With all due respect, just because you're poor doesn't mean you're ignorant.
As I said, very sophisticated.
Yeah,
It was
so
a...
just
it was-
can you answer the
I'm
question?
in the
Because I
ha-
mean,
I'm
we
in
want
the
to know.
habit of
I'd
saying-
like to know
I'm
whether
in
or
the
not
habit of
it's
saying
true.
thank you to compliments. That the so-called X date is a moving target.
So when do you you're the Secretary of Treasury, so tell me, when do you predict, given where we are right now, will we hit the ceiling?
Some point in the middle to late summer.
Is that August, July?
Again, it is imprecise.
Well, sir, I just think that it is an abomination that we are actually giving bigger tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans who don't need a tax cut.
gentleman's time has
Meanwhile, we're
expired.
taking away food assistance and health care from people who desperately need it.
Gentlewoman's time
Thank you,
has
and I yield back.
expired. I now recognize Mr. Estes for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Secretary Bessent. Thank you for being here. I know you have been very busy in the last 2 days, and appreciate you coming back with struggling through the jet lag that you're obviously feeling. I just want to, I have some remarks here. I just want to throw out a couple of comments that have been talked about. I mean, and I believe you mentioned this earlier, is that after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the top 1% went from paying only 40% of the tax burden to now paying over 46% of the tax burden. So as we've put in this good Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the top 1% are actually paying more. And I know a lot of questions from the other side of the aisle talked a lot about the deficit. And as you mentioned in your earlier remarks, the country's been fairly consistent in maintaining tax revenue at about a 17 to 18% of GDP. Unfortunately, the problem we're dealing with now is spending has ballooned up to roughly 23% or 24% of GDP, which is creating that problem that we have an imbalance. So I really I have several things I want to cover. First, I want to talk a little bit about Section 899. It's a common sense provision that's based on 2 bills that Chairman Smith and I introduced. It's not new. It's not revenge, as some in the media have been proclaiming and wailing about the last few weeks. It's a reasonable approach to make sure that foreign countries don't pilfer the U.S. Treasury with UTPRs or DSTs. And the fact is, if we do nothing, we're ceding our tax authority to other countries. And the JCT is warning us that we will lose $122 billion in tax revenue over the next 10 years. Ways and Means could have responded with much more severity in terms of the bill that we looked at. We took a measured approach that maintains our tax sovereignty and that either discourages our allies from moving forward with these discriminatory taxes, or will raise our tax revenues by $116 billion over the next 10 years. I'd like to submit, Mr. Chairman, for the record, an op-ed from Bloomberg that covered this topic. Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Secretary Bessent, are the fears that Wall Street has over the 899 grounded in truth, and what's behind the stir, and why wasn't there outcry from the Wall Street and economists during the last administration working with OECD in a manner that put America last?
Sir, I believe that there is quite a bit of misinformation on 899, and I also believe that if businesses came back, took a deep breath, and much of the pushback is coming from overseas companies, and overseas companies are worried that their countries may try to usurp U.S. authority. So if a European country, they tried to unfairly tax a U.S. company or take money away from the U.S. Treasury, then it would fall perhaps on that corporate. So they should look to their own capitals. This is a fiscal bill, not a revenge bill.
Right, I agree with that. I think that some of these companies need to be lobbying their own government instead of trying to lobby the
100%,
House
Congressman.
administration. Something else that I've been pushing over the last 6 years has been research and development expensing. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit this Washington Examiner op-ed titled, "We're a Nation of Innovators, but our tax code no longer encourages it."
Without objection, so ordered.
Immediate expensing for research and development is a jobs provision, with 3/4 of the R&D expending spent on wages and salaries. Also has broad bipartisan support. I believe we need to provide businesses with certainty by making immediate write-off permanent, because it takes longer than 4 years to actually develop more new methods and technologies. Secretary, can you help explain why it's critical for our country to return to immediate R&D expensing, hopefully on a permanent basis as we finish this bill?
Sir, we are the undisputed technological leader in the world, from AI to life sciences. And one of the reasons for that has been the expensing of R&D. And we are pushing very hard to make this the best location for whether it is high-tech investing, whether it is biomedicine, or any other, the manufacturing process that we want to bring back. Part of the problem, I believe, is that the manufacturing process has been separated from the R&D process. So we need to have both of them here sitting side by side in the United States.
Yes, thank you. And there's so many other provisions I could do, but I'm out of time. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Del Bene is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. Mr. Secretary, do you support the government having a consolidated database containing Americans' sensitive financial, health, and personal information?
I support protecting Americans.
Do you support the consolidated database?
I support protecting Americans' personal
So,
information based on current law.
I think it's very concerning that you're not able to say no. This is not a partisan question. In fact, just last week, Republican Representative Warren Davidson responded to reports that DOJ is merging huge sets of data from across federal agencies into a centralized repository. He said it's dangerous when you start combining all those data points on an individual into one database. It's a power that history says will eventually be abused, end quote. Well, I could not agree more, and would also add that this kind of database would be a goldmine for malicious actors who are eager to exploit Americans' sensitive data. And Mr. Secretary, Section 6103 sets forth the confidentiality and disclosure rules for tax returns and tax information. Just because DOJ wants to compile people's sensitive information into one place doesn't mean the confidentiality rules go away. Is that correct?
We adhere to 6103.
So it seems like, that should be a simple one too. We should absolutely be clear that the confidentiality rules did not go away. In fact, earlier in this hearing, you asserted that the Treasury Department is following, I think you said, the proper provisions within the Privacy Act, all proper provisions within the Privacy Act and Section 6103. So my question for you is, how can we be sure that's happening? I mean, especially knowing that the president illegally fired 18 inspectors general, including acting Treasury IG Sherba. How do we know? I'm sorry, you saying that isn't good enough. We're an oversight body. How do we know?
Again, I will say that we are following the law,
But we need, that's not good enough, Mr. Secretary. You should be coming, we should have officials within Treasury coming. We should, and this is a statement to my colleagues on the other.
I'm here today.
But you're not answering how we know that. You're just saying we are. So
what would an acceptable
then let's
answer
bring
to
then
how
let's
do we
bring
know
people
be?
who are building a database. Let's go through the details of exactly what you are doing with that data, what protections are in place. We should have hearings doing that. In fact, we requested hearings on this from our partners on the other side of the aisle, refused to bring people from DOJ, et cetera, into this committee so we can be sure that a consolidated database.
A judge in the Southern District of New York has ruled that all of our protocols are.
Mr. Secretary, we are a
effective.
co-equal branch of government. We are the oversight body.
Well,
I'm
if you-
answering,
if-
I
if-
asked that
if-
question
if
because
you-
it is part of my job not to have you
If
just
won't
say
take
it's
my
okay.
word and a judge's
Then
word,
let's
I'm not
look at
sure
it.
how to satisfy.
I think because we actually have the authority to get that detail, we are oversight. We are not just here to have you say, don't worry about it. We are here to get detail. And I want you to be clear that it helps, this is a risk to the American people. This is sensitive, personal information. There is no clarity on how this is being protected. Early on in this administration, people were given access to information with no controls. We have not had folks come into hearings. That's not good enough, Mr. Secretary, and I'm supportive of making sure that we are using technology in smart ways. I'm also very supportive of making sure that we are protecting people's personal information and we are following the law. 6103 is clear, and there is no, and now this consolidation, there's no approval on how this consolidation takes place, and you can't even be clear to me that you're about where you stand in terms of making that happening. So I don't think we're getting the information.
Maybe it did not filter up to you, but we provided a staff-level briefing several weeks ago.
Then let's bring folks, I want to ask the questions, frankly. It's not
we
about
provided-
whether or not you
we
had a
provided
staff level briefing. Let's bring experts to answer detailed questions in this body so that we get those answers. You know, I have a technology background. I'm happy to have those detailed conversations of exactly who's given access, how that access is given, and how we are making sure that information is protected. We absolutely have to make sure that there are no violations, that there are the right protocols put in place. We have no data to say that. We just have, you'd say, just trust me, it's okay. That's not good enough, and
Any
Mr.
judge in the
Chairman.
Southern District of New York.
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I now recognize Mr. Smucker for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary, for being with us. And congratulations on what appears to be a great deal with China potentially, and a reset of our relationship, and a deal that'll be great for American business,
It's an
American
excellent
workers.
start, Congressman, but a start.
Yeah, I'm really continue to be proud of the work that we've done with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the impact that it had on my constituents, where average families in my district saw an increase of about $6,000 in their wages in the years following that. Inflation was low. I'll put up any day the record of the previous Trump administration with what we've seen, the disaster that we've seen in this past administration. And so grateful to have the opportunity to work with you to extend those benefits once again to every American. And we're hearing a lot from the other side here today on things that just simply falsehoods about the bill, things that are not in this bill. And I just want to remind our listeners what Democrats are voting for by voting against this bill. They will be voting for a vote against this bill is a vote for the largest tax increase in American history, a tax increase that will affect average households at every tax bracket level. They're voting for a decrease, in fact, a 50% decrease in the child tax credit, which is so important, provides important relief to every American family. They're voting for allowing Medicaid dollars to go to people who are here in the country illegally at the expense of American citizens.
Yes, sir, 1.4 million of them.
And they are voting to allow Medicaid dollars that are intended for people who really need them to go to individuals who could be working but choose not to.
They are voting for Medicaid benefits not to go to women and children as they should.
They're also voting against policies they voted for before that will be critical to grow this economy and provide additional opportunity. Policies like full expensing, they voted for that last cycle or last session. Full deductibility of R&D, full expensing, I mentioned full expensing, and then we're adding full expensing for structures, which will re-energize American manufacturing. All of the things Democrats will be voting against by voting against this bill.
Yes, sir.
So I want to again say that we're doing this is going to be beneficial to every American, and we're also doing it in a responsible way by finding savings that will drive more efficiencies in some of these programs, but will ensure that we will not add to the debt, assuming we meet very, I think, conservative estimates on growth. Do you agree with that?
Yes, sir. And to go back to the CBO, the CBO produces a black box. And that black box says the growth is 1.7 or 1.8%, whether we make the TCJA permanent and continue, and that permanence causes stimulus, or, as you said, whether we have the largest tax cut in history, which would be cataclysmic, obviously, but it also assumes no change in growth. So obviously, both cannot be true.
Exactly right. So we're going to do this in a fiscal responsible way. Now, I do have one question for you, and I only have a minute left. One of the things that I was impressed with when, during your confirmation hearings and leading up to your appointment as secretary, was your 333 plan. And particularly in the short amount of time I have, you have a stated goal at that time, at least, of getting to the deficit at being at 3% of GDP, which I know how much you're concerned about the debt. The Democrats today are raising concerns about the debt. I share those concerns. I think that's a great goal. Do you still hope to achieve that 3% debt to GDP, deficit to GDP by the end of Trump's term?
Yes, sir. It's a deficit to GDP, which the other side of the aisle doesn't seem to want to talk about, or the total debt to GDP, which Secretary Yellen and I agree on. It is those two numbers that matter. The absolute number, while daunting, those two ratios are much more important. And I said that we would like to have a 3 in front of the deficit to GDP by 2028, the end of President Trump's term, which is the long-term average.
And I think this sets,
Gentleman's time has expired.
sets the basis for being able to achieve that. There's going to be a lot more work to do, and I look forward to working with you to achieve that goal. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Chu for 5 minutes.
Secretary Bessent, my constituents are sick with worry about losing their health care coverage. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office just determined that more people will lose their coverage. 16 million people will lose their coverage as a result of this big, ugly bill, which will be the largest loss of health care coverage for people in American history. Now, Republicans are saying that this will all be accomplished by cutting out waste, fraud, and abuse. But we should not be fooled. This is accomplished by 30 different measures, including increasing the amount of red tape that people will have to go through just to stay on Medicaid and on the Affordable Care Act, or the ACA. In addition, the CBO says that this bill will cost Medicare over $500 billion. I think of the many grandmothers and grandfathers who need nursing facilities as they face various illnesses like dementia or Alzheimer's. In my district, 62% of them rely on Medicaid to get any kind of care. But this bill requires all kinds of new paperwork to stay on these programs, including paperwork for seniors seeking to dually enroll in Medicaid and Medicare. Where will these seniors go if they lose their Medicaid because they didn't file yet another form, all while having dementia? This is a life or death situation. But I guess Republicans believe, as Senator Jody Ernst said, well, we're all going to have to die. And then there is the ACA. I remember what it was like before the ACA, where people could not get health insurance if they had a pre-existing condition, like everyday conditions like asthma or even pregnancy. The ACA provided tremendous relief to millions. But this big, ugly bill will require even more red tape to stay on the ACA. It demands that 2.5 million people, like gig workers, like Uber drivers, who don't even know what they'll earn in a week accurately, estimate their income for the next year. It requires people to re-enroll year after year rather than having an automatic enrollment, which is not required by any health insurance or Medicare. It reduces enrollment periods so it can cut people off the program. And it takes away the premium tax credits that helped millions of families afford health coverage. And that is why at the hearing for this bill, I introduced an amendment to strike the provisions that undermine the coverage of the ACA. Every single Republican on this committee voted no. So Secretary Bessent, I'm asking you a question in which I only want a yes or no answer. How would you have voted on my amendment to protect the ACA and keep millions on their health insurance?
No.
Okay, that makes it clear. And Secretary Bessent, I'd like to address the reason that 16 million people are going to lose their health care coverage. It's so that millionaires and billionaires can get big tax giveaways and become even richer. The nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation just this week found that if this bill becomes law, the richest 5% of taxpayers in this country will get a bigger tax cut than the bottom 80% of taxpayers combined. To put dollar amounts on it, someone earning $1 million will get a tax giveaway of $81,500 in just 1 year, while someone earning less than $50,000 can only expect $265 in 1 year, which is only 73 cents a day. That millionaire will get a tax cut in 1 day that's almost as big as what the middle-class person will get over the entire year. And of course, this does not account for the burden of paying more for basic necessities because of Trump's tariffs, nor does it account for the loss of life-saving benefits like Medicaid coverage or SNAP food assistance. When the University of Pennsylvania included the benefit cuts into their analysis, they found that the poorest 20% of households in this country will lose $30,000 over their lifetime if this bill gets signed into law. It's quite literally a reverse Robin Hood scheme, taking from the poor and giving to the ultra rich. That's why I had an amendment that said there should not be tax giveaways for those earning more than $10 million per year. And so, Secretary Bessent, I only want a yes or no answer. Would you have voted yes or no on my amendment?
Again, no.
I yield back.
Mr. Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you again. Thanks for sitting here. Your predecessor, Janet Yellen, pushed Congress for the last 4 years to adopt the OECD Global Tax Deal. I'm grateful that you and the administration have been working to stop this. There's a lot going on in that space. And as the current global tax deal is formulated, U.S. multinationals are disadvantaged in two critical ways. First, they face 2 layers of minimum taxes, the existing robust U.S. system and the emerging OECD system. And 2, their traditional income-based tax incentives face stricter scrutiny against the corporate welfare regimes in China and the EU. The global tax deal fosters a kind of a Hunger Games style race for government handouts, cash subsidies, and refundable tax credits. The system rewards political connections and authoritarian regimes over innovation. And Mr. Secretary, as you know, countries are pressuring the U.S. to sign on to the global tax deal and want to push subsidies out of the income tax system into the hands of bureaucrats, distorting markets, picking winners and losers, and leaving their taxpayers footing the bill for political pet projects with dismal economic results. If other nations want to tie their economies in knots with that nonsense, that's their funeral. The U.S. should not play the role of global nanny, dictating domestic policy to sovereign states. Countries around the world are free to determine a domestic policy that meets their political and economic demands, but not at the expense of the U.S. taxpayer and our great U.S. companies. My concern, Mr. Secretary, is that there is an on and off switch associated with the implementation of this global tax deal. A lot of uncertainty of what's happening after your time in office and the President's time in office. The tax sovereignty of this nation is under attack. The last administration gave away U.S. leverage trying to sell the jurisdiction and purview of this committee to the OECD in Paris. We must not let that happen. The global tax deal isn't just a friendly suggestion, it's a loaded gun aimed at countries that don't join the cabal. I, for one, don't want the U.S. to be looking at the end of their loaded gun under the next administration or the one after that. Mr. Secretary, will you commit to working with us to put a nail in this coffin on the global tax deal once and for all?
My staff met with the OECD in Paris just last week, and we are pushing back and working toward a solution as soon as possible, Congressman.
Thank you for your work on that. And then one last thing, the current tax code has certainly been biased against investments and structures, and I've been working on this issue for a number of years since I've been on the Ways and Means, including a bill I introduced that implements a neutral cost recovery for structures. While we should continue to do more in this space to drive down the cost of investment in structures, and I know that's part of the big plan to get manufacturing back here quickly, I'm happy that we're moving in this right direction. And long depreciation schedules, as you know and as you've worked on, erode the value of deductions, hindering growth on domestic manufacturing. The provision that we included in the big one, beautiful bill that allowed full expensing of factories coupled with restoration of 100% expensing for equipment and machinery will be crucial for the President Trump's agenda to boost American manufacturing. We're hearing a lot of great things about that. Mr. Secretary, I want to reiterate my thanks, certainly the Republican Party's thanks for your immense support in this provision to implement full expensing of factories. And I'd like to yield the rest of my time to you to just talk about why that is so important to move quickly on this to get it done and what it's going to do for our economy.
Congressman, it provides great surety, but more than that, it provides the impetus for businesses to make capital allocation very quickly, and in a way, it puts us on an even playing field with the countries that heavily subsidize their industry. In the United States, we try not to, some administrations, like the past one, try to pick winners and losers. We do not. We try to set the best playing field and create the best environment. So the surety of immediate expensing is very powerful in terms of after-tax return on capital. After-tax return on capital is what drives this economy, it is what drives productivity, and it is what makes the United States the greatest economy in the world.
Mr. Secretary, again, thank you for being here. Appreciate your words, and I yield back.
Ms. Moore.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to yield 5 seconds to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Sanchez.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the nonpartisan policy research Yale Budget Lab analysis, which shows that $3,000 cut to household income because of Trump's tariffs.
Without objection.
Thank you. I yield back to Ms. Moore.
The Yale Budget Lab is staffed by
Thank you. This is my time,
former
sir.
Biden officials.
Where's the gavel, Mr. Chairman? He's taking up my time.
Proceed, the clock's moving, Ms. Moore.
Thank you. I want to join my colleagues on a bipartisan basis in regaling the life and times of Charlie Rangel. And actually, Mr. Chairman, were he alive today, today would be his 95th birthday. And you know, even if it weren't his birthday, I would have to have thought of Charlie Rangel at this moment, and the last real close personal conversation that I had with him when I considered your testimony here today, Mr. Secretary, and some of the other sorts of inquiries and comments of my colleagues here when they talked about the averages. The average taxpayer is going to receive this or that. It's sort of like the example that you almost gave here. You know, one taxpayer gets $1 million tax refund, another one gets a $1 tax refund, and then the average tax refund is $500,050. I had a Jesuit education, so we learned about the tyranny of averages. You ignore the distribution and outliers. You mask variations and inequalities. It's asymmetrically distributed. It's skewed. Because you have heard my colleagues talk about the real impact. Somebody under $50,000 a year is going to get $265,000, $265 versus others that get millions. That is not a question. That was my comment. Okay, so you and Doge were focused on eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. So let me just sort of outline some of the waste, fraud, and abuse that you found and tell me yes or no, was this what you found? $641 billion in subsidies for the ACA, $764 billion in Medicaid cuts, $300 billion in SNAP cuts, and then triggering $500 billion in Medicare cuts. Was that all waste, fraud, and abuse? Yes or no?
Again, ma'am, it's very, very difficult to give a yes or
those are the cuts. Okay, I'll move on. You're not going to answer.
Very difficult.
What I'd like to know is the $2.4 billion in debt and the tax increases of $4.5 trillion. Is that not spending? Are tax cuts spending and creating, especially, not just adding to the debt, but the interest rates on the debt? Is that or is that not spending, yes or no? Are tax cuts, if I give you a tax cut, am I spending out of the Treasury to do that? Yes or no?
Not if we,
Mr. Secretary.
not if we create more income.
Okay,
than the nature of
we're
the
talking about a gambler's fallacy with projecting growth that's never been proven by anybody, anything. So I will move on because I see my time is waning. Let me ask you some more questions. Do you think that a problem we have in our tax code is that we have $700 billion a year in a tax gap because you know, the very wealthy are evading illegally their tax responsibilities? Is that or is that not waste, fraud, and abuse? Would you characterize that as waste, fraud, and abuse?
Represent
I'm just a simple question. Is that waste, fraud, and abuse?
My priorities are collection, privacy, and customer service.
Okay, so but you
at the
didn't.
IRS.
We're not collecting that, and you cut 31% of the budget from the IRS that would have actually, you know, processed these claims.
The largest budget cut was in the IT department that began the modernization in 1990.
Okay, the
and
true
has spent
cost
more-
of
has spent
economic
more than
security
$50 billion.
has determined that 50% of Americans are financially insecure. 50% of Americans. So do you think that any of them are going to suffer from the cuts in Medicaid, SNAP, and ACA not to have these resources available to them? Yes or no?
I believe that they will be better
off
under
without these
under
resources.
this tax bill, just as they were under President Trump's last term, as opposed to the ravages of inflation under President Biden's term.
Well, let me just ask this. Why is this bill designed to take away some of the benefits that you claim people are going to have? They expire, like the senior tax credit expires, all of these things that these families are supposed to get. If you're so into uplifting their needs, why do they expire?
No tax on tips.
No tax on tips expires.
Sorry?
It expires. And it's not really a decrease on tax on tips.
If you would like to join me and making it permanent and have your Democratic
You're
colleagues
the
do it,
secretary.
then
You're the secretary, sir. You wrote the budget.
We would welcome you to join us.
Excuse me?
We would welcome you to join us.
I'm ready to join you right now. You would accept an amendment?
Time has expired,
Makes
Ms.
you-
Moore, by over a minute. I was very generous,
Thank
but
you.
way
Mr.
too
Chairman, you are always very generous. Let's be clear. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. The chair would like to inform the members that the committee will stand in recess for 10 minutes following Ms. Miller's time. Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm from West Virginia, and I'm going to give you a little Southern love. I graduated from Columbia College. My husband graduated from the Citadel. So we've got some roots in common there. Thank you for being here today. You know, after 4 years of inflation and unmonitored spending and non-existent trade negotiations under the previous administration, I'm thrilled to have you and President Trump back at the helm to deliver on America First policies. Having businessmen rather than career politicians running the country is already making a huge difference. Ways and Means Republicans have spent the better part of 2 years gearing up to reauthorize the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and put more pro-working class tax policies in place. This committee passed the most significant tax bill in modern history last month, and the House followed suit. It is now time for the Senate to do their job and get this big, beautiful bill to the President's desk. I want to talk about 1099-K. One of my top priorities in the tax package is to repeal the Democrats' absurd 1099-K threshold. Under the Biden administration, Democrats changed the time-tested standard of $20,000 in 200 transactions to $600 when determining whether a taxpayer receives a 1099-K or not. Before this committee, your predecessor acknowledged that this new threshold would be difficult to administer and to lead to the taxpayers' confusion. So instead of working with us to fix it, the Biden Treasury unconstitutionally delayed implementation and then changed the threshold to try and ease the taxpayers' confusion in the election year. Unfortunately, there are still millions more 1099-K forms that were sent out, and Republicans have worked to restore the 1099-K threshold to the time-tested standard of $20,000 in 200 transactions by including my Saving Gig Economy Taxpayer Act in the One Big Beautiful Bill. Can you shed some light on how this policy and others being produced from your department will make life easier for our taxpayers?
Representative, thank you for discussing these very important issues. As I said, I believe the underappreciated part of President Trump's economic plan is the deregulation. And what you were describing, the cutting back on paperwork, that putting thresholds at proper level is indeed deregulation, lower paperwork. And I think you correctly pointed out that the previous administration, I'm not sure that anyone ever signed the front of a paycheck or the back of a paycheck. I think they mostly received direct deposit from the US government because they're always government employees. So if you have never made payroll, if you are not processing paperwork, you don't understand the costs that are inherent in this. If you are a small business person, if you are someone with a lawn care business, if you are someone, as you said, we have a completely new economy today with the gig economy. Whether it is Uber drivers, delivery people, the contract workers who work from home, in programming fields. So I think that it was tone deaf, completely tone deaf for the nature of the new economy.
You are so right. And I also want to voice my support for the ongoing trade negotiations that the President and you are working on. For too long, our trusted trade partners have quietly taken advantage of the United States. And I'm a firm believer that trade truly is the great equalizer and a powerful tool to bring the world together. However, sometimes the tool can be used effectively and not always with fairness. I'm particularly interested in the domestic steel industry. From West Virginia, we've been producing quality steel for decades, and some in my hometown in Huntington and my district is currently ramping up more steel production even further with new mills in Mason County. So I'm supportive of the Section 232 tariffs on steel that the President has pursued, and I'm eager to work together with the administration to ensure that a level playing field is also applied to the US-UK economic prosperity deal. The UK has a history of subsidizing its steel industry, which in turn often undercuts our domestic steel producers. Can you commit to continuing working on securing fairness for our domestic steel industry across trade deals?
Representative Miller, I had the privilege of being with the President at the U.S. Steel factory in Pittsburgh a week ago Friday. And I can tell you that the President's commitment to the U.S. steel industry is unwavering, that we are bringing back domestic production, and what we have seen, and one of the previous questions about is China a reliable partner, what we have seen during COVID since then is that there are strategic industries in the United States where we must have an industrial base. And I would put steel in the top 3.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The